Good Friday, our Lord and Savior dies. You can't resurrect if you're not dead. Obviously, before I even knew you made podcasts, I knew you as one of my teammates on the basketball team. I think that's when we became close. Conversations about basketballs quickly became conversations about faith and life. In America, rugby is a lot newer. I think the modern Christian definitely has to go through that a lot. It's always risky territory for me because a lot of dating apps have their flaws. I mean, we're sexual creatures, we're animals, but we're also more than that. You always know when you're doing the right thing. To get into Harvard, you need to have cured cancer by 13, built a panda sanctuary by 17, and resurrected life by 18. Wacky courses could be the tagline for my entire existence in undergrad. And I do truly believe the future of healthcare is in low-cost diagnostics. But in my book, to align global incentives to actually really see that there is value in African life. What is the pain that they are actually feeling? My father, my brother, and my partner Naomi. Those are the three most important people in my life.
Boys and girls, ladies and gentlemen, welcome back to my podcast, Coffee's on me, David Quan, where I strive to give guests legacy-worthy interviews that listeners can enjoy while cooking, commuting, relaxing, or walking their pets. We're still amidst the Easter holidays here at Cambridge, enjoying a banana milk in the evening in my room. My guest, my teammate, my brother, has lived in Cambridge in the US and now in the UK, which we very much look forward to discussing. But for now, we are approaching 10,000 podcast downloads, and if you have been enjoying the discussions on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, YouTube, or wherever you listen to podcasts, thank you. And please do consider leaving a review and nominating a guest by contacting me via my Linktree, David Quan. Seeing this podcast on people's Spotify Wraps or receiving positive messages about the guests give me tremendous fulfillment. I cannot thank all the guests enough for their courage and insights. For those new to the podcast, welcome, and thank you in advance for your engagement. Please know that I don't take your time and feedback for granted, because when I first started this podcast at a low point of my time at Cambridge, I was mostly nervous about humiliating myself. But I went ahead with this passion project based on 3 ideals that still make up the content description for every single episode. First, a purpose of giving. Second, learning from others. And third, sharing of stories. Given my inadequacies, I will certainly listen back and laugh at how naive I am. But I genuinely maintain the deep conviction that this passion project, if wholly true to those founding motivations about giving, learning, and sharing, is a worthwhile pursuit. So now on to my very special guest. Jordan Mubako recently graduated from Harvard University, where he obtained a bachelor's degree with high honours in chemistry, with a sustained interest in chemical theory and research. He also has a minor in economics. He was born in Harare, Zimbabwe. His life goal is to revolutionize healthcare and development in his home country, Zimbabwe. He is pursuing a master's degree in Chemical Engineering and Biotechnology from the University of Cambridge. He is passionate about healthcare and energy and wants to dedicate his life to building sustainable systems in both fields. He believes the future of healthcare in Africa is low-cost diagnostics. Every year, millions of Africans go untreated because of severe underdiagnosis due to either low cost or availability constraints of diagnostic tools. He wants to change that and acquire all the tools needed to start his own low-cost diagnostics company across the continent. He is a founding member of Afroponics, an agri-tech climate-smart startup operating out of Lesotho, with the goal of empowering rural women by encouraging them to farm produce using hydroponics to boost yields and reduce waste. Jordan, what an incredibly ambitious, hopeful, and awesome bio. Welcome to my podcast, Coffee's on me, David Quan.
Thank you so much for having me, David. I'm really, really honoured to be here, and I'm really glad to join the esteemed list of all your guests that have been here before me.
I'm so excited. So we have been teammates on the Cambridge University basketball team. Yes. Any memories or highlights?
Well, besides watching you cook from the bench, I can't say I've had anything short of a great time just being your teammate. Obviously, before I even knew you made podcasts, I knew you as one of my teammates on the basketball team. And I think that's when we became close. Conversations about basketballs quickly became conversations about faith and life. And yeah, that's kind of really been how we've grown to me finally making it here in this seat.
Remember that dunk you had? It was awesome.
It's hard to forget. That was one of my highlights, being part of the team. Yeah, I really did enjoy just having my own sort of moment in the sun for a little while, because it is quite a talented team. So I'm really glad to have contributed to it.
It was so nice having you join us in Lent term, and I think the energy that you brought all with us and just the cheeriness that you always bring.
Yeah.
And I think every team, the bench, I always hear you saying, like, you're not that guy.
Yeah. Yes, my special, the sport is basketball, but the specialty is trash talk. I thrive off of just being on the bench, but in all seriousness, I also just like being kind of like an emotional barometer for a team and just supporting and motivating. And I really, basketball is great, but I'm okay not playing a second, provided I can shout and scream and be part of the team just vocally. It's such a big part of me. Just like I like relationships that we build in sports.
Yeah, absolutely. Which somewhat surprised me initially about your trash talking, because when we had our conversations, it was about God, about faith, and obviously, just your personality is always so positive. And then I was like, oh, Jordan's into trash talking as well. But I do think it has a role in sport.
Oh, 1000%.
Totally makes sense.
And I think obviously with sport, there's, you get fiery under the collar, and you get and no one gets it worse than the ref. I feel I've said the most heinous things imaginable to refs, and I tend to respect authority as long as they're not wearing the black and white stripes. So when they become referees, I don't know, something happens. But it's all in good fun, I hope. And I like to think after the game, no matter what is said or done, I'm happy to shake hands with the opposite team and even the ref if I have to.
Yeah, I always remember like coaches growing up saying like win with grace, lose with dignity, and participate with pride. And I think our basketball season was like that. We won the cup, we won the league. In fact, I love that photo after we won the cup of you holding me. And such a great memory.
I do remember that. That's saved in my favorites as well. Yeah, I'm saving that for this big end of year post where I just summarize the year. And I do think that the season was an incredible season. And for anyone who wasn't following the Cambridge Uni basketball team, we had quite a successful season, and I think all of that was just built on the back of just teamwork and being together on and off the court. And I think one of the things that really helped us was just building like kind of team chemistry, as well as becoming friends and not just teamwork, which really helps winning, in my opinion.
Oh, absolutely. I really loved our team and just really enjoyed it. Thoughts on Cambridge University basketball's Instagram and all the memes that Matthew makes?
Oh, I'm a big fan of the memes. I'm always, I think I've made myself always there to make the first comment, first post, first like. I really do think one of our best traits is our sense of humor, and we never take anything too seriously.
Any memes stood out from those posts?
If I can think just off the top of my head, any of the video edits. Any of the video edits, because that takes, first of all, lots of time and lots of creativity to put together. And whenever I find someone can when Matthew marries videos with audio and just getting it to sync up, it dawns on me that he's actually putting a lot of time into this, which just shows, I think, commitment for one thing. But another thing is just the way everyone rallies around it and realizes it's all in good fun. And I don't know. I think all of them are good.
You've also been involved in rugby at Cambridge. How are you finding that?
Oh, I love it. I've played rugby most of my life, since I was maybe about 9 years old. And I think the rugby team at Cambridge has a good group of classy gentlemen who I've made some definitely friends for life, just like basketball. And it's definitely been also challenging, I think, balancing the two. But I found the best version of both sports is just when you find yourself just surrounded with guys you love and trust and can build, I think, lifelong relationships with.
You're more experienced in rugby, because I remember at the Christmas party we were talking about your time in Harvard's rugby team.
Yes.
How do you find the rugby translating from US to the UK?
That's a very good question. I'd say it's like different languages almost. I feel like there's very much an American way of doing things, and I think there's a very British way of doing things, and it not just manifests in how people speak and how people act, but literally how the sport is played. I think the British rugby, on the backdrop of a rich cultural history around the sport, lends itself to a lot more structure, whereas in America, rugby is a lot newer and it's almost more informally done. Therefore, I find it's also more free-flowing and less centered around structure. So playing rugby in America for me was quite nice because I am probably a less structured player than many. I like to just kind of get the ball and run, which works well in America. But I'd say in the British system, there's a lot of, I think you have to sacrifice your own, maybe how you might progress for the sake of the team structure, which is a great way to make progress. But I think it's a very difficult transition if you're maybe used to the more free-flowing American 7 style, where it's just you get the ball and figure things out. Shoot first, ask questions later, if you will.
So your team hadn't won rugby varsity since, 2013?
Yeah, the 60s, the team I played for, which is the uni second team, hadn't won that many varsities in a very long time. I think the stat was we'd only won 2 in the last 10 years, and through no fault of our own. I'm sure it was all crooked refereeing. No, don't quote me on that. But I genuinely, it was very much a very emphatic win when we trounced the Oxford Greyhounds for 46-0 on their home court, on their home field, as well as on their 150th anniversary. So it was quite a nice victory for us.
So I really love the way you make Instagram posts and just how you use numbers. It's always like a countdown. So for the rugby one, you have 46 reasons to love the LXs, 23 men after my own heart, 2 coaches to lead the way, 1 club to rule them all. And then the basketball one was 0 points, 0 rebounds, 0 assists, 15 new friends. I think other posts that you've used numbers, I can confirm that you do in fact miss 100% of the shots you don't take. If you truly built different though, you miss 100% of the shots that you do take. Is there a methodology to crafting the perfect Jordan Instagram captions?
Oh yes, I think this formula is very simple. You want to say the silliest thing as possible and embarrass no one but yourself. I have no problem making a joke of myself. I mean, of course, I'm sure I scored more than 0 points and had more than 0 rebounds. But I do genuinely think humor is a very big part of how I navigate the world. And I like to show love to all my teammates, and I love to glorify all the great things about the people around me. And I do think humor is at its best when it's selfless, and I don't mind being the butt of any joke. And you'll find in a lot of my Instagram captions, I'm kind of drawing the short end, and I'm happy to do that because it's in service of really just celebrating some of the best relationships I've made on the basketball and rugby team. Yeah, I really do love everyone I get to play with, and I really love the chance to be able to play.
Yeah, again, the sense of humour and optimism always really struck me about you, and that's why I've always enjoyed our conversations off of the court as well.
Indeed, me too.
I guess I would love to get into your kind of ambitions in the healthcare space and in Africa, but before then, I just think it makes more sense for you and for us to understand how you got to those motivations. So we'll save that as a culmination of the other things. So maybe to start, I believe that before even Harvard, you were in Zimbabwe. Were you born there? Tell me about your family.
Okay, well, I was born and raised in Zimbabwe. I spent my entire childhood there. I was born in 1999, and I lived there until I was about 19 when I moved off to Harvard for university. And just like being in any place, you become I read somewhere once that said people are made from places, and definitely where you grow up shapes the person you are. And Zimbabwe more than shaped me. I grew up seeing a lot in terms of what was available, and I was very privileged to actually be granted educational opportunities to go to schools that allowed me to think and dream. But in that, you also become hyper aware of all the people who don't get that same opportunity. Literally just the side of the city you were born on or the family you were born into dictated so much about your life outcomes. And I think I became very intrigued and sometimes upset by outcomes and how unfair they were. And for me, at least, healthcare outcomes, wellness outcomes, sustainability outcomes, and how unevenly distributed they were throughout society became really, really evident as I grew up. There were many people who just would be sick just like anyone gets sick, but had completely different outcomes just because of their economic conditions. And I think that was very much an early thing that shaped the way I viewed the world growing up.
So was there a distinct moment that gave you that realization, or was that just a gradual as you matured and started to think about your future and your place in the world?
I'd say I couldn't pin it down to one moment. It was definitely gradual. I think as I entered into my adolescent years, I became quite aware of financial constraints in a way that I never think about. You never think when you're 6 or 7 whether or not your family is rich or poor, or whether or not anyone else is the same. All you care about is playing at break time and peanut butter and jelly sandwiches, and that's about it. I think when I turned about 14, 15, I started to become hyper aware of just how uneven and unequal society could be, particularly because I found my own family, although relatively well off, I'd say, in Zimbabwean context, we ran into some financial troubles ourselves, and it became an immediate reality that through no fault of your own, you might have to change schools, which I had to do, or move cities, which I had to do. And then you start to really think about what's actually possible and what other people can never actually be able to witness or experience. So I'd say, about that age is when it dawned on me.
So you moved cities when you were in Zimbabwe?
Yes, we moved from the capital city, Harare, to Bulawayo, which is the second biggest city, because my dad just had to look for work and find a job where he could. And the job market was not necessarily the best in Zimbabwe, and that change in circumstance meant a change in schools, a change in what was possible, and a change in just viewpoints that had to happen. So having been government educated and then private educated, I had to move back to government school, and I think you start to really think about what is actually possible, and and you realize one isn't better than the other, one isn't outright superior. It is very much just a circumstance thing, and I think you become hyper aware of just that nothing happens really because no one falls into a situation because of fault. Sometimes things just happen very randomly, and you're very blessed to have a good nurturing environment around you. I think a lot of times I internalize it as, everything that is good to me happens because I deserve it, and therefore everything was great. However, the implication of that is the things that don't happen to people means they don't deserve it, which is far from the truth. Opportunity is just sometimes randomly distributed. So that's a very long-winded way of saying that moving schools and moving cities really just opened my eyes to different situations.
That's so interesting because I just think about your Instagram bio, like the way you're rewarded is God's decision. Keep moving forward. It kind of relates to this realization that you've had. And in fact, I've been going back to the Gospels recently just to, go back to scripture to see how I could be a better man. Right. And there was that one passage about like the disability, the lady with disability. Yes. And, they asked Jesus like, did she sin or did her father sin? And then Jesus said, well, neither her nor her father sinned.
Exactly.
And it just kind of... this realization that there's not always that direct causal effect of things. Yes. That's fascinating. So you started at a government school?
Yes, I did my first 4 years at a government school, and then I moved to a private primary school.
So in like the Western world, private schools are typically, I'm generalizing of course, associated with elitism, privilege, opportunities. But like in China, for example, the state schools are actually oftentimes the better schools. So in Zimbabwe, is there a difference?
No, there definitely is that bent towards, I think the private schools are the more expensive schools, and because they're private and separate from the government, the trouble is, particularly in many developing countries, is government schools only do as well as the government is doing. And the Zimbabwean government has had many failings, and therefore I think government schools, it reflects in it as well. Whereas private schools have kind of been shielded by money. So a lot of the times, it is a general rule that private schools tend to do better and tend to have more resources to pour into their children. Okay. So that was the situation.
So Shona is obviously the language, but as an education student, I kind of looked a bit into, the language of instruction in those countries. And I'm not sure if Zimbabwe is the country, but I know in some African countries, like you're like by year 4, like you either pick up English or something.
Oh, yes. Exactly.
Okay, it is year 4.
No, you're very much correct. It is about that same time.
Our supervisor must be so proud.
Yeah, obviously the education is paying off, because you're right on the money. By about your 4th year of primary school, you're definitely, all the instruction is in English. I did just about all of my school instruction in English.
But that transition is so hard because the teachers don't always have that education, and the kids who don't have that English background at home, they would really struggle to even understand, and they lose interest in the subject matter and discussion.
Right, exactly. And it's inherent in the sort of navigating the post-colonial educational space. Zimbabwe is a former English colony, but English has no real roots in Zimbabwe. So a lot of students are almost bent, so almost kind of starting from a few steps back, because they're dealing with these huge abstract concepts, but also in a language that isn't necessarily natural to them. So it is almost quite miraculous seeing people learn in a language that isn't their own. And
did you struggle with that?
I was a little bit different, I'd say, because my father and his side of the family has more than just Zimbabwean origins. My grandmother, my dad's mom, was Jamaican, and being Jamaican, her entire language is English, and patois, which is Jamaican, kind of derived from English. But so I grew up speaking a lot of English at home, so it didn't pose as much of a problem for me, I'd say.
Would you like some more banana milk?
Oh, I've been dying to try another glass, please.
That's wonderful. Speaking of your family, I know earlier you mentioned your father.
Yes.
Takawura Veke Mubako, quite an extraordinary man. I was very touched by what you shared, I guess, for your graduation. You wrote, "My father is my hero. He has been my biggest supporter all my life. He has guided my every step and advised my progress. Everything I know about being a man comes from him. My biggest failure in life is that I fall short of his integrity and kindness. His generosity and kindness know no bounds." And the Amos Award, is that how I say it?
Yes.
Was merely a culmination of all the values I gleaned from Dad. I hope I can continue to emulate Taka Mubako in every way possible. Running hard, dreaming big. I love you endlessly, Dad. Tell me about Dad.
Yeah, well, I mean, if it wasn't clear, I really, really like my dad.
Just like love.
Yeah, I love my dad. He's a great guy. And I meant every word. One of the things I like is being very truthful. And his saying that he used to tell me is, if you tell the truth, you never have to remember what you said, because it's just the truth. It's just kind of a fact. And the fact of the matter is, like, he really has been there every single step of my life, always helpful, and he's been the person that's probably shaped most of my worldview, growing up and watching him, because just watching him work so hard and work tirelessly for the greater good of other people. A medical doctor by profession, but also a basketball coach, and he's just been the type of man who's shaped a lot of my interests, and just watching how he treats people with a kindness and a generosity. And this is every single person at every single point in society, not making any sort of preference for people who are better at this or who have more of this. Just watching him growing up, how all people mattered equally, just really instilled a value for relationships.
That's beautiful.
Yeah.
Was there a particular kind of dealings that he's had of a circumstance or a situation that you perhaps didn't appreciate as a child, but now as an adult you look back and it's like, wow, Dad set a great example there?
Yes. I think one thing I saw from my dad growing up was he was never he's never been a corrupt man. And I say this because a lot of the time, at least in countries like Zimbabwe, which I can speak of, a lot of the ways to get ahead in business and even in life is to socialize and politic and get in with the right folk and make sure you know the right people to put you in the right places. And a lot of the times to do that requires lots of sacrifices of integrity. Mm-hmm. And every single time I've been there to witness him having the opportunity to get ahead or to undercut someone, and seeing him choose to not do that and to go the long way round and not to cut ahead or not to cut a line, and in fact in many ways sacrifice his own progress for the sake of others. I've seen him pass up opportunities. I've seen him refuse gifts and awards that have been thrust upon him because, in his opinion, there's people who could use them or receive them or make better use from them. And just to see that on every single day, it's bound to leave an impression on you, you know?
Why do you think he acts in that way?
Well, that's a very good question. I think he also is a product of his environment and his influences. And he was a man of faith, and it always has been. And not in a blind sort of faith sort of way, but in an active, inquisitive. I know we've spoken about this sometime, like actively engaging with the word. And I think he's found kind of a strong, solid foundation in that. And when you do have that, you're kind of unshakable, almost unbeatable.
It's infallible.
Yeah, it's amazing. The extent to which, I think that strong foundation makes you navigate this world like almost on easy mode. Just because you see this greater than what you can immediately see and touch. And that commitment to that makes you easy. It becomes easy then to do the right thing.
So did you grow up going to church, and is your family a regular churchgoer, a member of, a church?
Yeah. My family, I have very eclectic family members. Some are Catholic, some are Protestant, a lot of them are Anglican, but generally speaking, church has always been a kind of foundation in any iteration of my family. There's always been church on Sundays, and for that fact, I'm quite grateful for, because it was not only a steadying hand, but a very constant source of just morality and ideas about how to live life.
Were you so I guess you've always had that faith, and what were some of the perhaps questions that you have grappled with over the years regarding faith and your upbringing?
Well, I actually have never found it so hard to believe that there was a God. That was never the thing that I struggled with. A lot of people struggle with that. But I think a big struggle, and I don't think this is unique to me, was then taking as the first principle that there is a God. It's then making sense of the injustice in the world, right? And I think, who said it, that I think 90% of all atheist gripes with religion are just disagreement of how God does his job. It's never like, I don't believe that there can be a God. It's more like, if I was God, I'd do it differently.
So it's like that, like if there's a God that is omnipotent, omnipresent, and omnibenevolent, then why does evil exist in the world?
Exactly. Why does evil exist?
Why do you think so?
That's tough. I've thought about this, and this answer may not be so well thought out, but I do believe it's the juxtaposition of free will and almost ironically God's love for us. I think human being, God is perfect, and I think God's creation falls short of God's own perfection, and I think human beings in and of themselves are flawed, and that one of those flaws comes from just being able to choose between the right thing and the wrong thing. I think one of God's greatest gifts to us is free will, and the choice to love him, the choice to do the right thing is a great gift, because it's God imparting an agency upon us, an agency that maybe sometimes based on our actions we don't really deserve. So bad things happen, sometimes out of randomness, but also sometimes out of our own actions. We do bad things. I like to take accountability, and I like to make sure I understand I am in locus of control of a lot of the things, not everything, but some things. So I think I resolve this by realizing God does not cause the bad things to happen to you. That sick relative or that unfortunate accident, that is not a will that the Lord has for you, but it could be perhaps a result of a world in which free will exists. And these I'm obviously not the theologist, so perhaps I could use with some education in that anyway.
Yeah, no, it's fascinating. I mean, I had a discussion, I think, a couple episodes back with Melissa about God's plans, and she obviously gone through some really difficult time and started questioning, and she kind of raised, a friend kind of mentioned about the so-called fourth dimension. We with our human limitedness don't always see the big picture.
Right.
And it's like, well, if you take everything into account, if you can see what God sees, which is everything, in the long run, it does make sense.
Right.
And I think a lot of, I guess, religion and spiritual, the afterlife is important. Like, that is the real, God's kingdom. Like, suffering in this world, then if you look at it from that perspective, doesn't necessarily mean it's bad, because this is just a training for there. But I guess other kind of Bible quotes, like, Jeremiah, like, for I know the plans I have for you, plans to prosper you and not to harm you, plans to give you hope and a future.
Yes.
And I guess from my own kind of interactions with people, a lot of people then go, well, if that's the case, then why did I just get ill, or why did this misfortune happen to me? And I think that's when the fourth dimension of the afterlife comes in. And that's the faith part, is do you believe that there is something much bigger out there for justice and for goodness and for purpose, right?
Exactly. And I think a lot of that, it's funny you mentioned that, Jeremiah 29 verse 11, that's one of my favorite Bible verses, and I think that's one of my mum's favorite Bible verses as well. And I think what I get from that is, there's got to be more out there than what we can immediately see. And I think based on that, once us realize that any sort of like pain is kind of compulsory. That is just part of life. Pain happens. But I think suffering is optional. And I do think foundational to our belief, to any sort of faith-based religion, is the belief in a greater purpose, greater than we can even comprehend. Like you said, I like that idea of a fourth dimension. And I think sometimes submitting to that reality, whether or not you understand it, doesn't mean you'll have this, this heavenly moment where everything opens up and now everything makes sense and you're Neo in the Matrix seeing the ones and zeros. Sometimes it just means a sort of peace that descends upon you to say, even if I don't understand this right now, I can still live life. I think that can be quite comforting.
So, in terms of faith, obviously prayers is a big part, and this is again a big holy God who hears prayers and who answers prayers. And Jesus says, like, ask and it will be given to you, and that kind of stuff. What have you? Yeah, what's some of the biggest prayers that you have prayed for that have come into fruition in your childhood?
When I was 16, I remember praying to find a partner, a really good partner. And
Naomi showed up.
And then, well, not immediately. God let me meet exactly the opposite of that for a few years. But fast forward to the fall of 2019, I ended up meeting...
Not the fall, but...
Not the fall, sorry. I've been in America too long. The autumn of 2019, I met the love of my life, and God willing, touch wood, my future wife, Naomi Davey, who's my partner. And that's probably the best answer to any prayer I've ever had. So yes, that's probably the biggest, best prayer answer I've had, because I prayed for this and it happened.
So you were 16, you're praying for a partner, so I guess like 16-year-olds don't always think about...
Oh, not at all.
So why were you firstly praying this and making this a priority of your prayers?
Well, I mean, it's different lenses to look through. If you ask the psychologist, they'd probably say, because I'm a child of divorce, my parents are divorced, I probably have always felt this missing piece of that kind of togetherness. But I think in reality, that might not be too far off. But I think as someone who values relationships, I've always wanted to experience the greatest form of each relationship. I want to be the best brother possible. I want to be the best son possible, best grandchild possible. And very importantly, I also want to propagate that in my own life and be the best partner possible. So I think even at 16, with knowing very little about the world or myself, I think I've always known that I wanted to end up with someone amazing and complementary to me, and someone I could build with and grow with. And I think a lifelong relationship is one of the best gifts you can actually have.
So one of the things I personally love about kind of religious conceptualizations of marriage's relationship is that seriousness that it has, which I think modern culture has lost it, or at least in contrast, there's dating apps like Tinder and stuff, like you just go on and you swipe, and the amount of kind of again, I'm not here to condemn anyone, but I'm just saying that it's very clear from scripture the seriousness upon which they view it. So have you ever had to grapple with the contemporary culture of being a guy, being a lad, being a rugby lad? You should be doing a certain type of thing, but being a Christian as well, you should be acting in righteousness and.
No, I think that's a very common. I think the modern Christian definitely has to go through that a lot. I would say beyond the scope of rugby, because I think rugby players sometimes get a very bad rap when it is really probably more of a masculinity things and a modern conceptions of what it means to be a man beyond the constraints of any sport you happen to play. I would say, I think there is a conflict there. We're very finite creatures, grasping for infinite, right? Grasping for the infinite, grasping for things that are beyond us. And I think one of the things that gets eroded is that just kind of old school, not to sound old fashioned, but this old school idea of just commitment and just doing one thing. And I think the problem with and this is it's always risky territory for me, because while I do agree that a lot of dating apps have their flaws, I can almost see how they come to arise. It's because in reality we just are struggling for connection as a race, as a human race. And
it touches the very deep of our desires, that human.
Yeah.
Because even the Bible again mentions so much about like sexual immorality, and it clearly notices this urge that we all have, right?
Yeah, I mean, we're sexual creatures. We're animals, but we're also more than that, right? And I think true growth isn't denying all these like very animalistic urges. It's appreciating and understanding where they come from and acting in spite of them. I like to think there's a very big difference between avoiding a problem and dealing with a problem. I think with regards to pursuing a good relationship, you could argue that there's no right way to do it. And I'd also, for the record, I've known people who've met on dating apps and gone on to live very helpful, very loving lives.
Yep.
And I think the dating apps as a point of connection, sure. But dating apps as the only source of human contact, I think there's a lot of stuff that gets eroded. You just shouldn't be able to click away a human being. It shouldn't be a thing, but it's where we are.
So I guess the Bible's conceptualization of like marriage, like I think it mentioned, again, I might be wrong, that the man leaves his father and mother and connects with his wife, and they become one flesh.
Yes.
And from a, I guess, biological or psychological perspective, like the symbolization of becoming one flesh, and
yes.
let's not separate, let not man separate it.
Right.
And obviously that's, I guess, what you're working towards, is that lifelong relationship that you were talking about. But there's also, I guess, conflicting views now about between more liberal interpretations of scripture versus more conservative on things like, say, premarital sex, law of chastity, etc., etc. How do you go about making these type of decisions? When it comes to, because obviously the Bible was written in that context.
Right.
And I think a lot of it is timeless. Obviously, it's timeless, infallible, inerrant. Is that? I think that's the word as well.
Exactly. Oh, that's that I think is the challenge of the modern Christian, right? When the Bible had just been freshly printed 5 days ago, I think it was very easy to apply quite literally everything you heard. Yeah. What makes sense for a group of Israelites wandering in the desert with limited resources for 40 years might not make sense for a black Zimbabwean immigrant in the United Kingdom in 2023 with phones and apps and a world where... And it's just a different context. But I do think certain truths remain. And I think the truths are very much, maybe not summarized, but at the very least crystallized in perhaps the New Testament, where I think a lot of the old law and the old sort of like eye for an eye, tooth for a tooth, Old Testament interpretation kind of gets crystallized into very simple messages that prioritize relationships and how you treat people. And wherever you fall on the religious spectrum, I find it very hard to find a single human being who can actually disagree with what Jesus said or what Jesus believed, regardless of whether you're religious or not. Do you believe people should be treated the same? Do you believe, like what Jesus said, like love your neighbor as yourself? I think if you really and truly believe that, then it makes sense that you want to have a partner who you love as you love yourself, who you want to treat the same. And all other laws fall from that. And I think we oftentimes nitpick and say this and say that. And weird, like us creatures who, as far as I'm concerned, no one here is older than a couple of decades. We now somehow try to gatekeep the law. And it just doesn't make sense to me.
So I guess it's just not like a rule book. It shouldn't be treated as a nitpick, like fundamentalist kind of way, but rather the principles and
exactly.
And I guess our conscience.
Exactly, right?
You should know what's right.
Exactly. Like I think morality is very intuitive, and I'm not of the school of thought that a couple of philosophers and a couple of bearded dudes in robes in like ancient Rome or ancient Greece are the reasons we believe what we believe. No, we fundamentally have compasses within ourselves that point towards the right thing. Conscious and guilt, the thing that I think we all feel, and we all definitely know what the right thing is. Anything short of that is willful ignorance. And that's my opinion. Sorry if that's a little spicy, but that's how I feel.
Yeah, I think, what you said about love your neighbour as yourself, again, I went to an Anglican school, so it was very steeped in that kind of I was reading the scriptures and looking at the person and works of Jesus.
Right.
And it is, the golden rule is something that I always thought a lot about. And in fact, I've now got a different almost understanding of it because... Actually, on the podcast, I hosted the president of the Christian Union.
I see.
And we were talking about understanding like colonialism, understanding like the Crusades and just the evils that, we have talked about as well. And I kind of, at that point in time, I was like, well, we should just just keep the golden rule, love your neighbour as yourself, and then the world will be great. And then he reminded me, well, actually, before Jesus said that, Jesus first said, love the Lord your God with all your heart and with all your soul and with all your strength and with all your mind, and then love your neighbour as yourself. And it kind of grappled with me. I was like, because I know in Matthew it always said, well, for this is the, all laws basically summarised into this golden rule.
Yes.
But I guess from my perspective, like if God is this all perfect, all loving being, then if you love God, then you will follow this rule.
Yes.
Right, so that faith overflowing, I was always quite confused about, when Christians are like, well, works don't matter.
Right.
And I was like, what do you mean? Like, it does matter.
Yeah,
but it's like they're talking about salvation, which is the faith-based, the grace that God gives.
Right.
But it's like, I got explained, well, actually, but if you have faith, the work should stem from it.
Exactly.
And if you don't have the works, then did you really have faith? And how did you balance the work and the faith?
Yeah, work and faith and work. It's like biblical chicken and egg. And I'll begin by saying I don't pretend to have all the answers. I only know the answers that work for me. And I think I also always come back down to like kind of the intuitiveness of faith and how you always know when you're doing the right thing. And I think people complicate life because when no one is watching, when it is just you and the quietness of your soul, and no one else can survey or interpret your motivations, you know exactly what it is you're feeling. And I do think we have that in us as a kind of guide. And in terms of work and faith, like I think faith for me is a key element, and the work flows from that faith. And I think intention also matters a lot. I think you can go through the motions and do all the check boxes and tick all the boxes of this is what someone would do, this is what someone would do. And effectively, if we just judge you by your work, you'd be like, oh yeah, this is a good person, it's a good Christian, it's a good whatever, Muslim, a good whatever belief is. But I think if there is no sort of underlying sort of reason for it, an underlying conviction, maybe faith might not be the word for every single human being. I believe faith works for me, but if there's not an underlying conviction that this is the right thing to do and it is right to do this, then the work is almost performative, I think. Yeah, because we all know what looks good on paper. We all know what looks good in an Instagram post. We all know what looks good to greater good. But like, what do we do when no one is watching? And what drives that?
That integrity.
That's integrity, and that's faith, I think. And that's a belief that I don't think you can fake.
Which is interesting because, American Ivy League applications demand so much of, common application. You got to put in like 10 extracurriculars, and often you need like leadership roles. And what we often find out, understandably, high schoolers set up these clubs so that they could put co-founder or founder on there and kind of do things for the sake of that means to the end.
Yes.
What were some of the things that you have put in, like that you had done pre-Harvard that had really helped you to stand out and get into Harvard?
Yeah. I always joke to my friends that like to get into Harvard you need to have cured cancer by 13, built a panda sanctuary by 17, and like resurrected life by 18. And in reality, I think that's sometimes how it can feel. I was by no means a remarkable student. I think I worked very, very hard, and I tried to do as much as possible. I find Harvard, at least my interpretation of it while I was applying, was a school that celebrated effort and that celebrated people who really tried at things and were really passionate. And sometimes in specific areas, if you really loved science and you went to do those extra miles and then you joined that extra project. And sometimes if you're more generalist, I feel like I was more generalist. I like to stick a finger in every pie, kind of a jack of all trades. So I loved sport. I loved cultural activities, played a little bit of guitar, did a little bit of public speaking on the side. And I really just tried very hard to just kind of max out all my kind of capacities, oftentimes disastrously failing in just spreading myself way too thin and not doing anything, not getting any one thing done to completion, but sometimes really, really stretching myself in a very healthy way that made me realize how much I was actually capable of doing.
So what were your like spikes for your Harvard application?
I would say service was one of the things that was...
What did you do?
Very much a part of me. I worked... This is very difficult for me to say because one of the things my dad encouraged me when I was growing up, and this is probably very specific to Zimbabwean culture, is we're not a big culture of bragging. So I realized someone said community service was something that was important to add. And I thought back to my time, and I used to volunteer at a home for children and orphans, and I did that for about 4 years, just like 3 times a week, and I'd iron clothes, and
normal. It was
just normal work, and I didn't think of it as something I'd ever have to put down on an application.
Yeah.
It's something I don't put down on my CV. I don't put on my resume. I don't think charity belongs anywhere on a LinkedIn page. I think that's definitely something you should do because you would do it, and I would. But it just happened to be a thing that someone mentioned was very important. And I think quite selfishly, I then went back on my word and actually put it down. Another thing I think was science. I was always a big fan of science, and I was a very curious student. And this manifested in doing some science Olympiads, some math Olympiads, obviously my A-levels like everybody else, and trying very hard to just keep pursuing knowledge in a very scientific way. That was probably another spike, I'd say.
That's so interesting about the community service, and I think that was the part that I think was the best thing about the Anglican school that I went to.
Yes.
And, the faith component of, understanding like the radical inclusive love that Jesus showed, that, he was eating with tax collectors, with sinners, and of people who were most dejected in society at the time. And the Son of God came not to be served, but to serve. And, and I think one of my favorite verse in 1 Peter, everyone should use whatever gifts they receive to serve others as faithful stewards of God's grace in its various form. And I think it's so powerful. I think young people actually most connect with something far bigger.
Yeah.
And it's very much in those acts of service, like give and you will receive.
Yes.
There's just something special. I can't really describe it, but when you go out of your way and consciously do something for other people, you do genuinely receive more than... At least I feel like I receive more than I give out. And
I think you're so correct in that. I was speaking to someone about this the other day, And they said they genuinely don't believe you can do anything truly altruistic simply because you get so much out of helping people. So it almost doesn't feel like altruism because I mean the adage is altruism is you get nothing out of this. But if doing good and making someone's life better genuinely impacts you positively,
your well-being,
it almost feels selfish. It's like, oh, this is not for you, this is for me. I get so much out of it. And for me, I just think that's one of those godly designed kind of like inbuilt hardwired like reactions that are kind of like it's like positively reinforcing good behavior, because I think the way bad behavior makes you feel when no one is there, like doing something bad and you just be like, that wasn't okay, that was wrong, is the exact same way that good behavior makes you feel when you've done something to genuinely make someone's life better, even if no one ever speaks of it, even if it never appears on a billboard. I think it's the type of warmth that you feel inside. Yeah.
Wow. And the other thing that you mentioned was science.
Yes.
What kind of science stuff did you do to get into Harvard?
Oh, well, I specifically, let's see, that's almost hard for me to answer because I can't say I did it to get in. I did it genuinely because
what was your
I liked it.
Scientific achievements at the time, or interests at least?
My interests were, we had this, we had two very big Olympiads that we did. One was like a general science Olympiad and one was a maths Olympiad. And I always found myself passionate about like physics and chemistry growing up. I always found those two disciplines so interesting. So much so that I'd read kind of beyond what my classes prescribed. And I started doing a lot of things earlier than I should have. I found it so easy to learn about stuff in a very pure, beyond writing exams and studying. Just like if you genuinely cared about something, I found it incredible that there were resources online to just essentially teach yourself. And moving from schools that were more resourced to less resourced, I actually found that to be the best thing. That when I moved to government school after high school became really expensive, I just found like you could just go to a library with a library card and an internet connection. You could basically figure anything out for yourself. And I found myself, I ended up writing my exams some years or some months early just to give myself a free berth to just explore stuff I wanted to do. Most people write O-levels or GCSEs when they're 15 or 16 in my country. And I wrote mine a year early just because I found I was just effectively teaching myself. And when you're self-pacing your teaching, you can cover so much more ground and free up space to learn more stuff. And I ended up receiving some awards, and this is very, very difficult for me to talk about because, again, this culture of not liking to speak highly of oneself. But because you asked, I was the highest mark in my country for physics and chemistry at GCSE level. Wow. And I think, it's just all because of, none of that was intentional. None of that was with that goal. It was just pure academic pursuit that just made me want to just learn as much as I can about those disciplines. So it was really, really a fun time.
Did you know beforehand that you had a really special gift in science?
No, I didn't know I had a special gift. I just knew I was very curious. And I've always sort of been very curious.
So you made that practical connection quite early on, that what you're learning here could be revolutionary. And
oh yeah, it was just the ability to read books and kind of live through the lives of others. I was very interested by Einstein and his progression. Well, just how human he really was. Obviously, there was an inherent genius in him, but all the things I liked about his books or the books about him were his human mannerisms, how he worked, how he operated, him cycling to and from. Because it made me think he's just like me, just a lot smarter. And because of that, I found science then as a discipline became a lot more approachable. Oftentimes it's relegated to this realm of, it's for the gifted, for the special. But to find out how human these scientists were, these scientists that made these breakthroughs and discoveries, was kind of eye-opening for me as a budding young scientist, to be like, perhaps there is a way I can mark my own path in this field of science.
Wow. And okay, so is there anything else about kind of pre-Harvard that you might want to share that's really important, or else we can move on to Harvard?
I'd say before university back in Zimbabwe, I'd say the only thing I really would want to say is how valuable it was to have grown up with a good support network and a good support structure. It was myself, my dad, and my older brother Jared, and just I can't speak in enough great gratitude for my dad. I already said this, but like just that really did help me and really prepared me for the next step.
Is he still in Zimbabwe?
My brother or my dad?
Both.
My brother is in Zimbabwe. Yes, he's studying law right now, and he's in his last year. And my dad is currently working. He's working a locum. He's a doctor, so he's working a locum right now in Bermuda, and he's been there for about 4 or 5 years. So all over the place, but all roads lead to Zimbabwe, and we all meet up just about once a year in Zimbabwe.
Wow, that's awesome. Okay, so you made it to Harvard with all of these myths and kind of prestige, and it's the dream, right, of getting into Harvard, and Harvard is so often featured in pop culture, and I'm sure you also had connotations and perhaps felt a bit daunted. Remember the first day? What was it like?
Oh, I found it like it was a ride. It was a wonderful ride. Just a incredible chance to, I think, brush shoulders with as an institution I respected. It was a well lauded institution, but it was also a place I think I genuinely did believe I fit into. Oftentimes I remember on my first day I got there and I was like, wow, this place is huge, and this place I was also just kind of drawn by how interesting every single person was. Everyone had a story. Everyone had a spike or multiple spikes. There were Olympic gymnasts, figure skaters, people who built organic chemistry labs in their basements, people who were bound for PhD programs somewhere, and other people just wanted to be nature conservative. Just all sorts of interests were just kind of in this one place, and I was just like, wow, I'm just this kid from Zimbabwe who really likes science. But I think there was a lot of that.
And how did you go about choosing your majors and minors, and did you try out some wacky courses?
Oh yeah, trial and error. Wacky courses could be the tagline for my entire existence in undergrad. I think I changed subjects maybe 5 times in total, and I began in engineering. Then I said I wanted to do computer science. Then I didn't want to do computer science. I wanted to do economics. Then I switched right at the end to chemistry, returning back to my old love, and found myself very happy in that department. And I think it was because of the American system, where you are allowed to try out different courses and nothing is set in stone.
That liberal arts system, very different to the UK, where you're just stuck.
A whole different world. I think the UK, although I will say there is some merit to just doing one thing and building expertise. I would wager that intelligence aside, I would say the average British student in any subject probably knows more than the average American student in said subject, simply because you spend more time grappling with every different angle you can look at engineering or chemistry from. Whereas I spent a lot of my time taking literature courses or history courses or economics courses, and probably only half to 3/4 of my courses were actually chemistry courses. So I think there's something to be said for focusing on one thing early.
So being away from home, you're in a place of great, again, prestige and history and reverence, and I know from our conversations that you thought of home often, of Zimbabwe. And I guess it's 2 different worlds. And how did your views of Zimbabwe and of your place at home change as you progress through Harvard and see more and more of that society?
Yeah, I think looking back at it, I had a lot of preconceived notions of what it meant to be Zimbabwean and African, and it's almost very hard to actually really know where you come from until you've left the place. I think there was lots of things I thought I took for granted, and I thought this is just how the world was. In terms of the political discourse, the way the government is run, the way infrastructure is set up, and it was only when I left Zimbabwe that I was able to really critically look at it and see how bad certain things were, and also how good certain things were. I find the best parts about Zimbabwe were the community-centered, value-centered.
Takes a village.
Yeah, it takes a village to raise, and I found that was heavily contrasted with maybe a more Western individualistic way of looking at life. But at the same time, I also found limitations in the way of maybe a community-based way of viewing, and kind of excessive selflessness almost leads to sometimes lack of progress. And I think I really just kind of got the chance to see both sides of that. Yeah.
And so 4 years at Harvard, you did rugby. What else did you do?
I was on the African Students Association. I served as the vice president of the African Students Association, as well as the political action chair. I found myself heavily involved in just being part of student campus life, and my African identity, something I never had to think about in Zimbabwe, because you're an African amongst Africans, became a very key part of how I defined myself and how I viewed myself, for better or for worse. But it became, I think, a real big part of my daily life. And so I found myself gravitating more to more affinity organizations for Black students, for African students. And I think I spent a lot of my time, when I wasn't playing rugby, I spent a lot of my time in those sort of environments.
So when you met someone new at Harvard and, you had 15, 20 seconds to introduce yourself, what were the key things that you always mentioned?
I think where I came from was definitely the chief one. I also would say the college or house that I was in, because that's just kind of a nice touchstone so people can reference and it's kind of quick way of just navigating or just like positioning yourself. Oh, my name is this, I'm from this place, and I'm in this college or this house. And I think that would kind of be the general exchange before you delved into deeper topics.
And then once you made it to Cambridge, if you had, again, 15, 20 seconds, do you then add that extra layer of then I studied in America at Harvard?
Oh, no. I don't think... I find... Then this will be a recurring theme, and I'm very, very sorry to any listeners, but that's something I find very difficult to talk about, simply because although I do think it is an incredible school and an incredible opportunity, I don't think it is particularly an interesting thing about me, because I find it hard to bring that up in conversations without, I think, sounding like a sorry, I'm not. Can I swear on this?
Yeah.
Like a douchebag. I find it very hard to say, like, and this is probably even more douchey of me to even say that, but even just like quite genuinely, like I think it's not something I bring up, because I'd say, yeah, I'd much rather talk about what I studied or what I learned as opposed to where I went. It is just simply a fact about me, right? No, and it doesn't define me in the way being Zimbabwean defines me. It's like saying, oh, my name is Jordan, I'm 6'5". Like, it's like, okay, so what? Like, it's more like, I don't know, I like this, or this makes me laugh, or these are, I like things that maybe talk about one's worldview and one's opinions as opposed to just facts about one's life.
Right, like more the abstract but meaningful and
Yes,
personal.
exactly. And and the things that have a lot less implications, because I do think there is also at some point, like, people might also have their own preconceived notions about you based on that place, and they might think you're a certain type or and I don't like the elitist sort of implications that come with it, hence me trying to avoid it.
So how has your 4 years at Harvard helped you grow, do you think? Like how like comparing Jordan now and the Jordan first week at Harvard campus, what's the biggest difference? Like, if I met you in first week of Harvard, would I still think it's the same person? Would we still get along the same way? Would we talk about the same things?
Well, as nice of a person as you are, you probably would try and get along, but I think you'd be shocked by how thick and uneducated I truly was, because I think I knew a lot of facts about a lot of things in my head, and I could compile and crunch numbers fairly quickly, but I had so many lessons to learn about empathy, about relationships, and these are lessons that I don't think are even fully formed now. I had, like, my biggest lessons at Harvard were actually other people, and it's very cliche. It's the friends we made along the way, but in reality it is the friends we made along the way. It's genuinely so I think I've had to just grow and learn so much about myself, about being empathetic, about building relationships and valuing other things beyond just pure knowledge. think, yeah.
Interesting. And how did you then come to the decision to study your master's degree in Chemical Engineering and Biotechnology at Cambridge in the UK?
Because, well, while I was scrambling around a lot in undergrad, I did find myself very interested in healthcare and very passionate about solving certain problems. And one of those problems was the state of healthcare in Africa. And I do truly believe the future of healthcare is in low-cost diagnostics. And for the continent, I wanted to just work with people who are working on low-cost diagnostics. I stumbled upon Lisa Hall, my supervisor, her group, here at the Chemical Engineering and Biotechnology department. And they were just doing really interesting stuff and figuring out how to make diagnostic technology for a fraction of the cost and make point-of-care diagnostic technology for places like Zimbabwe or the Philippines.
So what are the barriers now to reaching lower costs for diagnostics?
Well, I think a lot of the research is in its earlier stage, and it's just getting funding for the research. Low-cost diagnostic technology is not immediately profitable in developing context. The people who need it the most probably can't afford it. So it's very hard to mass produce a product and scale it up and get enough people to pay for it and then not actually turn a profit at the end of it. If I came up with a new diabetes pill or a new treatment for a very prominent disease or condition in the Western world, it would probably be very easy to roll out, easy to fund, and easy to profit from. But there's a big irony in that the people that really need these point-of-care technology are the poorest of the poor. So they wouldn't actually be able to afford it. So I think it's incentivizing investment into that, at least from my point of view.
Right. So I'm guessing you also obviously took your minor in economics because you recognize that the science needs to combine with the commercial side to be able to be more widespread and to be sustainable.
Yes.
So in the context of what you just said about the poor actually needing the most, but ironically being, or I guess the one that can't afford it, how do you see the intersection of business and your research?
Well, I think the solution is going to be multifaceted. It's just no way to do it. There's no one solution. There's not one magic pill. I think it's aligning incentives, getting big multinational players to really and truly see the value of a healthy developing world. I think by 2040...
so it has to be justified by economic means.
I think you have to, and it's terrible to say, but
can you quantify life and life expectancy, quality of life, right? The inherent human dignity that we were talking about.
You shouldn't have to, right? You shouldn't have to. It should be enough to just know that there are people suffering to spur us on as a race to action. But in reality, people are fueled by incentives, and I think a lot of the time, and this is just a lot of development rhetoric I've heard and been a part of and spoken with, is there seems to be this sentiment that the emergence of Africa as one of the biggest global markets is now making people more and more interested in Africa, which is great to know, but also a bit sad. It's almost as if your worth as a consumer is what drives people's investment in you. Because we can keep you long enough to be able to then buy iPhones.
That neoliberal logic, yeah.
Yeah, and it can be dehumanizing. But in my book, from my point of view, if this is what it takes to have lower child mortality, to have a healthier African populace,
it's a means to an end,
it
like
can
utilitarian.
That's one way to look at it, and I do genuinely feel like we need to align world global incentives to actually really see that there is value in African life.
So where there is conflict of incentive at the moment, who are the stakeholders and why are they conflicting, and how do we help them to align their incentives?
Well, you can think about people who have the biggest to lose and the biggest to gain. I think where there is conflict of incentive is a lot of the times is in the non-governmental organization space, where you do have lines of funding and sources of people who are interested in helping, but they have very limited knowledge of the actual thing on the ground. So that's just a lot of funders with a lot of good intentions, but very few follow through, and failure to actually meet head on with locals. Right. And I think that often happens. You have these harebrained outreach projects where people want to vaccinate people in villages, but they send 1,000 vaccines and they realize that they don't actually know the travel routes, or they don't have anyone on the ground who can actually help them, or they don't realize that maybe this particular village or this particular group of people needs to learn a little bit more about immunization, and they aren't as trusting, sometimes rightly so, of medicine. And I think it's whenever there's that sort of mismatch between intention and follow through, and it ends up with like disastrous problems when you actually don't include the people you purportedly want to help. Yes. Yeah. So the solution to a healthcare problem in a region of Zimbabwe can only be solved if you include those members of that region. You don't just need a bunch of well-meaning people in France to donate money and suddenly the problem is solved, I think.
That's so interesting, because I do a paper in transnational sociology, and it's very much like, well, these issues of environment, healthcare have transnational implications. Like, it extends beyond the sovereign boundaries that we place.
Right.
So then it seems to be a logical conclusion that global problems require global solutions.
Yes.
And you got like World Bank, UNESCO, and all these NGOs who applies these, one-size-fits-all policies, but it ignores the local context. Like you said, the roots for a vaccine, it's just, you can take certain principles, but until you go underground and truly understand the diverse and unique needs, it's very difficult to have the effect that you wanted. So for you then, do you see yourself, like, obviously there are different stakeholders, as you said, who are all needed to contribute, and everyone kind of plays their own role. In terms of where your strength lies and where you want to be in future in life, where do you see yourself in terms of this conundrum?
Well, I would like my contribution to the solution of healthcare, I think, will be bridging those gaps between, I think, the multinational stakeholders. I'd like to be present in the room, and if not being able to bring locals to the table, at least represent the locals at the table, and be hopefully a steadying hand that kind of allows sort of a meeting of the minds. So definitely an intermediary role is something I want to do, because I am familiar with the Zimbabwean context, and hopefully gaining an educational knowledge of the way the world works, bringing those two together, I think is something I could see myself doing and how I want to fit into it.
So we all know that facts and numbers are important, but humans are also emotional creatures who are moved by stories.
Right.
How do you think we, and interpret we in whatever way you want, can truly demonstrate the real issues at stake here? How do we actually mobilize people to get them to care about what you're caring about?
Yeah, I think you want to give people a sense of ownership. And that means, to me, it means giving people an idea of the stakes. And I think we only care about what we can relate to. And a first step of that is stopping the practice of otherizing struggle. As long as it is something in a faraway place, the place you can't pronounce.
If I don't see it, then it doesn't exist.
Exactly.
Yeah,
People you don't see, people who, as long as it exists like that in your mind, it's easy to detach and dissociate. But if you get a call today saying your aunt, who you used to play with or used to sit you on a lap, is sick, it ruins your day, because you feel a sense of ownership towards that relative. And I think it is and I think the solution genuinely is in bridging gaps between people and making Zimbabwe or America or Tanzania or anywhere, making it not seem like a faraway place that has no impact on your life, but making it seem like literally your neighbor who you care about.
Yeah, definitely. That is so interesting. Like, I remember the hymn, like, when I needed a neighbor, were you there?
Were you there? Yes.
Were you there? Like, that was.
Were you there? Were you there? Yeah.
When I need a neighbor, were you there? Were you there?
Yeah, I remember that.
And I remember our chaplain kind of saying at the end, well, that neighbor isn't necessarily that immediate physical neighbor.
Yes.
It's us, humanity. It's our brothers and sisters. And I also think about what Obama, I don't know where you sit on Obama, but I think there's no doubt that he was an expressive, emotional, moving speaker. And I remember him, saying like, if there's a child on the south side of Chicago who can't read, that matters to me, even if it's not my child. If there's a senior citizen somewhere who can't pay for the subscription, who has to choose between medicine and the rent, that makes my life poorer, even if it's not my grandparent. Like, I do think that we as human beings always fall short. Like, this is an ideal, and I don't claim that I possess all that empathy and I always care for other people as much as I want to, or I know that I should.
Right.
But I think having those awareness and that our life is not just us and that there are implications. So how did you... We've kind of talked a bit about how you built this awareness through your home, through your education, through other people.
Right.
How do we get children and, high school students, university students, young adults who are trying to forge their path and forge their careers to really resonate with this purpose and message of there are others?
I think children will be the easiest because children are without bias. Children are without preconceived notions. You kind of are born with empathy and unlearn it as you grow older. That's how I genuinely feel. So I think you just need to put children together and just literally wait. They become friends. They have no judgment. They don't know race, creed, culture, and I think that's easy. I think as we get older, it becomes more and more difficult. We're more stuck in our ways. Ourselves, in our young adults, college educated.
Because you get burnt a few times. You're like, oh no, I need to protect my own interests.
Right, you lose faith in humanity. You lose...
But it's always so disproportionate. Like 9 people could be nice to us, but that one person that hurt is it feels so much more.
It's like a negative bias, right? Like the negative action's way more. But also I think you have life pressures that are genuine and valid. For example, lots of people have different circumstances, and the most important thing to them could actually be being able to make some money and
for their family,
take their family out of poverty.
Yeah.
And can you fault someone if that is their frame of reference for maybe not caring what's going on far away? Because they do have real crises in their own lives. Yeah. So that's always tough as well, right? I
guess that's where in Luke's, I think 12, where to whom much is given, much is required.
Right.
That we are all given different amounts, but the more that you have, the more responsibility. With great power comes great responsibility. Yes. So it's almost like you're judged not by the objective amount that you give, but almost by the proportion of what you can give, or it's like the intuition.
The parable of the woman and the talents, right? It's like she gave what she could give, and it was more that this woman gave that one coin. That was the one, like it was proportionate too. That's what matters. And I think it is when you give of what you can, that you really are, that the generosity really starts to count, right? Millionaire giving away $10. Maybe, it's still $10, and like there is value in that. Yeah. But it obviously doesn't cause as much of a dent as a woman who only has $10 to her name, but truly believes a cause is worth giving $5 of those dollars. Like you're giving away half of your wealth.
And also, I guess that it's not always money, where sometimes time and love, like kindness.
Oh yeah, of course. Money is just the easiest, most readily available way we falsely judge value by. I would argue, like you said, time and just like care. Like those are much more valuable, right? Yeah. If someone has a very busy day and they have their own storms of their own lives, but they're giving you an hour of their time just to deal with you, I think that's huge. So I don't know. I think dealing with people who have their own individual storms and their own lives and getting them to somehow give off themselves to others, I think that sort of empathy will truly change the world.
That's why I really just dislike when people just point fingers all the time at, oh, but you could be doing more. Like, I get that we should be holding each other to account and upholding the standard that we all want, but we don't know what other people are going through and what stories that they have and what's, and it's so interesting that you talk about, like, when their family's in poverty and their kids are struggling, is there anything wrong with them looking after their kids and prioritize that? Like it.
Yeah, I don't.
It's a very human.
Yeah, it's the easiest thing in the world is to judge, because to judge means to assume that I have figured everything else out and I have a lens through which to get onto you and I think that's dangerous. I think it's very dangerous to make any sort of flash judgment about someone, because when you judge someone, you take the entirety of them and you summarize it into a few tenets that you don't even know are true because you don't have all the information. So yeah, I don't begrudge anyone who takes it upon themselves to liberate their family, even if it's at the expense of maybe immediate acts of charity. Like, I know nothing about what they have to do, what their responsibilities are. I only know what I see, which oftentimes isn't the whole story.
Which is quite hypocritical, I find, when we judge as well.
Oh yeah.
I've been rereading Luke's Gospel over the holidays, and kind of like Jesus talks about, like, first take like the plank out of our own eyes, and then we'll see kind of remove the speck in our brother's eyes.
Yeah.
And it's like, oh wow, it's like
Exactly. I think that's so true. And
but we all have a natural tendency to judge, like me as well. Like I go through sometimes where I start judging people, and it's not pleasant.
Yeah, it's very unpleasant. We don't really like that about ourselves either, right? Because it's like we all deep down know that we're not perfect, and I think we find that very unsettling. So sometimes, instead of dealing with that, we just look for the imperfection in others and point and hope and pray that we can draw enough attention to them that no one is looking at us.
Yeah.
I find the most dissatisfied people are the most critical. Generally speaking, as a rule, whenever someone is being as cruel and as ill-intentioned as I can imagine, I now try to think, what is the pain that they are actually feeling that is making them do that? Because it's not out of inherent just hatred that people do mean things.
Yeah. It's like how you treat others is a reflection on yourself more than others.
And it's a lot of self-image. A lot of it is self-image, right? Truly happy people don't even have the space to hate. They don't have the space to judge.
So much love which binds all things.
Yeah. And oftentimes the people that are the most hateful need us the most. They need us to be there and to be caring.
I think that's the hard part. That's the most interesting part about education as well, where kids bully, and it's just such a commonplace thing. But when you have that lens and perspective in mind, you realize that the bully's actually struggling, and but it's like you need to obviously maintain that justice, and but it's so tricky to. I think just ultimately we all need help. Like
we all do, and I think that's also part of it, right? It's just understanding that humans are fallible and make mistakes, and not holding any one human being to so high a regard that it crushes us when they're flawed, and understanding that we ourselves are flawed, and maybe judgment isn't the best instinct in any capacity. It's probably more understanding that's better.
We haven't talked about your agritech climate smart startup, Afroponics. When did you start that, and is it still running? Are you turning a profit? That business side of things.
Yeah, very, very, very good question. So yes, it is still running. This was a product of myself and my two co-founders, Jibril Rushingabigwi, he's from Rwanda, and Lerato Takana, who's from Lesotho. And it was an idea that came to us in undergrad, where we were thinking a lot about back home and making a contribution. And we wanted to marry social enterprises with viable business solutions. So we wanted to help a particular group, but also create a business that could be profitable on the continent. And we ended up settling on rural women in Lesotho and hydroponic agricultural farming. And what the brainchild of that became Afroponics, a company which is centered around teaching locals the skills of hydroponic farming, giving them the ability, resources, and know-how, and then allowing them to engage in strategic partnerships where they can farm and turn a profit. And a lot of a big problem is a lot of women have no access to the means of production in Africa. A lot of them are relegated to this source of like just housewife / farm worker, but none of them are given rights to actually be involved in the buying and the selling and the production of the crops. So we hope to change that with our business.
Wow, and how's that progressing? Are you looking for funding or?
Yeah, we are 3 years in. 2 years in officially. 3 years in terms of just like the entire process before. We have attained some funding and we've won.
From angel investors or VCs or just.
A lot of it have just been these social entrepreneurship grants. I don't know if you've heard of the Davis Peace Projects, Davis Projects for Peace, some funding through Harvard, and right now we're still engaging some investors as well. It's a lot harder than it looks to actually get people to really care, but we are trying. And in terms of profitability, we've been profitable for the last year, more or less, and volumes aren't as high because we're fighting very much against existing supply chains and distribution channels, and we're really trying to disrupt because a lot of the crops we produce, Lesotho imports, and we're actually thinking that for the good of the country, it would actually be better if they moved off of the imports, but we're fighting kind of the big bad companies that are from outside, and they don't want to lose business. So I think it's very much an uphill battle, but it's a battle we're willing to fight.
That's so interesting. And did you kind of learn most of the business side of things on the job?
Oh yes, 100%. I think we began with very limited knowledge and a very high sense of self, because I think it's a stretch to think that anyone in their first or second year of uni knows everything there is to know about starting and running a business. However, I think we did learn it in the most organic way possible, trial and error. And then we realized very quickly that we didn't have all the answers. And one of the key elements we had left out was actually local women. And we started bringing more women from the area onto our team and onto our kind of executive board. And we actually now partner with a woman from Lesotho who's actually one of the co-owners, and she bought into the show. She's one stakeholders in the company. And we also have begun to have a rotational internship program where we actually take young women studying at the local agricultural universities in the region with specific knowledge into the program to give them some training. And we're starting to find that definitely helps our understanding of business and our understanding of how best to operate in the region.
That's so fascinating. And what would you say has been the biggest mistake on the business side of things? Obviously, like, we learn from all of it, but what was like a strategic error, perhaps?
I think one of the things we're thinking about now is our product offering. I think we didn't have, and we still don't have as diverse enough of an offering as I think could really help us make the business as competitive as it could be. I think if we could offer more crops and give people more options of things to get, I think life would be a lot easier. But right now, a lot of the thing is we've become very, very good at producing lettuce and bell peppers, but not much else. And I think we need a lot more to have a very diverse bouquet of offerings that I think would actually attract more customers.
Okay, that's wonderful. And after you graduate this year, what's next? Are you doing a PhD? Are you going to work more full-time on the startup? Or?
I think after I graduate, the number one goal is to find myself positioned strategically in a career that I think will help me do the thing I want to do when I'm 30 or 40 or 50.
Which is
contribute positively to building sustainable systems back home in energy and in healthcare.
So would you then need to maybe start, say, in the corporate world or something and get experience? And
I feel like in many ways that is almost frowned upon, but it is very in some very obvious ways a very good way to actually get grounding in a lot of the very basics.
Yeah. I'm sure on Harvard campus there's a lot of debates on like so-called selling yourself. Or... Yes.
I think that's definitely a big one, and it's one of those things. Like there's this old joke about, because a lot of people start to lean very much. I don't know, something about the university level and being young. You become very anti-establishment and almost very socialist with Che Guevara posters and there's the joke is if you're not a socialist at 18, you have no heart. If you're still a socialist at 40, you have no brain. And wherever you fall on the political spectrum, I think part of that speaks to just like sometimes there's a practicality that comes with growing up and realizing that maybe you need an actual grounding in something. If a job existed right now where I could go and do what I want to do back home, I'd do it. But unfortunately, that job doesn't exist. I realize now the job I want to do,
or at least you're not ready for it.
Oh yeah, and if it did exist and I was given it, I think I'd ruin it and I'd mess it up so quickly. So I need a few years of training before I can truly, I think, make the contribution I need.
So would you be looking, what type of jobs are you going to apply for? Like consulting, investment banking?
I'm very much open to I guess any sort of thing. Ideally, I'd like to be working in the healthcare sphere or in the energy sphere. I think that would be something that is
healthcare consulting, healthcare
consulting, energy consulting. I mean, I don't know. I mean, if anyone, if I could get hired, that would be great. Right now, I found the job hunt is not as easy as maybe I initially thought it would be. I think there's a lot more rigor that comes with getting a job. It's not enough to be qualified. I think you have to know people and know how to I guess progress yourself and put your own name forward. Which is something I'm not particularly good at because of my own beliefs of how to be humble. But I think sometimes you can shut yourself out of opportunities.
Right. Yeah, it's so interesting because, I mean, when I applied for uni and even when I was applying for jobs, I read like Varsity newspaper for Cambridge. I've read a lot on the Crimson for Harvard.
Yes.
And it is so much about like pursuing your passions. Are you selling out? Are you buying time? Like, It's clear that our generation and ambitious students who, when we craft our college essays, it's all about making a positive impact on the world. And as you say, that is exactly that's the passion and enthusiasm that you need. But it's like, as you finish your degree, you go, oh, wow, like, what can I actually do and what makes sense? And I don't think I have the perfect answer. But I definitely, personally at least, reject, again, this people judging other people. I think it's good to give advice. I think it's good to share what we know and what we believe and to question people, to help other people articulate their views so that they themselves can come to a conclusion that makes sense to them.
Right. And also, sorry, on that, not to cut you off, but I also think there is a very, very unspoken degree of privilege that comes with being able to be like, I will, shirk off practicality and just do what I enjoy and searching my purpose. Like the type of person who can graduate and move to a country where he's getting paid close to nothing and follow his dreams or his ambition sometimes means that he or she has a very, very strong financial backing of something to fall back on in case things don't work out. Which unfortunately a lot of people don't have. And I think people don't speak enough about it. Like, I think you have to sometimes be somewhat privileged to be able to say, okay, I'll just drop everything and go and do this one thing on a whim. Whereas a lot of people have a lot riding on them, I think. Particularly people of color or people from maybe non-European, non-Western backgrounds.
Yeah, that's so true. Because so I'm, as you know, president for the Cambridge University Entrepreneurs. So I've been having lots of discussions recently about our 20K competition. And there's just a lot of students who are like, well, I'm interested in entrepreneurship. I want to set up a startup. But I just don't feel like I'm one of those like successful people who have that conviction to be able to just drop school, quit school, like the media hypes like, Bill Gates, Mark Zuckerberg, drop out of Harvard once you throw everything into your dreams, it will work out. But actually, like when you dig deeper, Bill Gates, for example, had already negotiated with Harvard that if it doesn't work out, he would be able to go back. And for every Bill Gates and for every Mark Zuckerberg, there are countless people who just don't work out. And I also remember reading, I think, the founder of Warby Parker, with the glasses. When they sought investor funding, a lot of investors didn't invest in them for the reason of they didn't sound very convinced because they all had very clear backup plans of what they will do as a grad job.
Yes.
And it's
Yes.
like, it makes sense that those people aren't like, you know, like it is unfeasible and almost stupid to just drop everything to pursue something that could fail. And the people who can do that, indeed, as you said, have that kind of privilege that they can do that,
Yes.
you know, and it's often not from their own making.
Yes, and I've got some friends I still know from undergrad who did drop out or who did consider quite seriously dropping out. One of the most interesting things I heard was in this sort of world of VCs and in this sort of world of seeking funding, there is almost credence and there's almost cred that is given. Like someone said to me, it's almost worth more that you dropped out of an Ivy League school than that you graduated from an Ivy League school, because it almost indicates to people how much you believe in your vision. It's like, I could have gotten this degree, but I dropped out. But I don't. I just think that is just heaped in privilege, because it's something that I could never imagine doing, especially considering just like all the people that are invested in my own sort of progression or who care. And it would almost seem like a slap in the face to where I come from.
Yeah.
To not grab every opportunity by the horns.
Yeah, absolutely. It also reminds me of Maslow's like hierarchies of needs, right?
Yes.
Like you start with your kind of basic physical, physiology, safety, and then love and belonging, then your self-esteem, then finally you get to that self-actualization stage. I think there's good basis for that.
I agree.
Yeah. Big decisions. I'm very excited for you and where you would take things.
I do believe in the heart of hearts things will work out.
Yeah.
But I almost feel
stressful at times.
I do feel like right now with the uncertainty, I think it is quite stressful. But I like to think most things worth doing will stress you out for a little while, and that's almost the point. You want to struggle with it. You want these ideas and these convictions and these passions to keep you up. Yeah. And then when you arrive at that crystallized moment, I think it's all the more worth it.
I've got a couple final questions to wrap up, but before then, in the context of giving you a legacy-worthy interview, we talked about like a snapshot of who you are and a meaningful piece of recording that you can look back on in 10, 20 years' time and maybe share with your kids.
Yes.
Is there anything else that, I know we've touched on quite a lot of different things. Yes. Is there anything else that you want to be featured in this recording, or else I've just got two more?
The last thing I want to say, that I must absolutely say, is I would not be anything that comes across as polished, anything that comes across as complete or well put together or well strung out. I'll not be anywhere near that without three people. My father, my brother, and my partner, Naomi. Those are the three most important people in my life. And I'm only saying this because I know for a fact that they will all be listening to this. And I love them all very much. But I do think I have to emphasize the importance of good relationships.
The Trinity.
To happiness, yes. The earthly Trinity. The very, very earthly, very, very human Trinity. But those are the people that I think have shaped so much of the person I am, and I hope will continue to shape me. And I'm just so grateful. So I just want to take that moment to...
So building on that, this doesn't count for my final two, but I'm going to say one of them and give me the first three words that come to mind. Naomi.
Kindness, gentleness, dare I say perfection.
Dad.
Wisdom, direction, protection.
Brother.
Silly, comforting, and just non-judgmental. And that's two words, but yeah.
No, if you put a hyphen
as well. Yeah, I put a hyphen. That's a hyphenated non-judgmental. Actually. Yes.
Okay, well, I guess we're currently Wednesday. Easter weekend is coming up, and I know how much faith mean to you.
Yeah.
What does the resurrection of Jesus and the Easter weekend mean to you, and especially for listeners who don't have faith and don't believe it, and well, that's the second to last about faith.
Well, Resurrection is new life, right? I think there's two lenses I look at it. The one is the end of the old and the start of the new, and it is a chance to really think about rebirth. It seems very similar to almost baptism, for me at least, because on Friday, on Good Friday, our Lord and Savior dies, and he truly does die, and at least that is what my faith, what the faith says. You know, he died and he resurrected. You can't resurrect if you're not dead, and in that is like suffering, or pain and difficulty is a necessary precursor to this new life. So it's almost a promise and a hope for things being better. And the other point of that is, resurrection is the chance to truly, I think, grasp with our mortality and our sin, and there's a redemption that comes out of it. Like, nothing is the end. Jesus died for our sins. At least that's what my belief is. And whether or not you're Christian or not, I bet you're flawed. I bet you have things about yourself you'd want to change, and I bet you at the worst of the worst you think they're irredeemable. But nothing ever is, and everyone is better than their worst decision. And I think Easter can be a time of really calling to mind how redeemable we all are, and how redemption is not beyond any of us, which I think is worth thinking about.
I guess grace is that free gift, right?
Yes.
I think I remember someone saying, like, the only thing you need to come to God is nothing, but a lot of people don't yet have nothing.
Yes. Oh, wow, that's very deep. Yeah.
Okay, well, final question.
Yes.
The typical final one, I know you've listened to a few episodes, so you probably can see it coming, but given all the things that you've been through across continents, the highs and lows, the different people who've shaped you, what's one message, quote, or saying you wish every teacher, every coach, every educator would promote and every child would internalize?
Summarizing it all in one quote has never been something I've been very good at. But if I can just look into myself and think, I'm going to ask for a few seconds. I think this isn't a famous quote, but it's something that means a lot to me. Being true to yourself does not preclude you from being able to include others. And by that I mean, you can be upstanding, be moral, be kind, without shunning anyone, without judging anyone. You don't, humanity is not necessarily exclusive. There is no cool club. There is no right club. There is no better human being than others. We are all the exact same. And the best version of ourselves is inclusive. And I really do wish people knew that. I think we spend too much time fighting and not enough time loving each other. Sorry, that's a very long quote, but
It's not a zero-sum game.
It's not a zero-sum game. We
the pie can grow.
There's enough for everyone. There really and truly is. And I don't know who benefits from making us think there isn't, but you can really be kind to someone and lose nothing.
And gain, as we said,
gain more.
Give and you will receive.
And I think, and I really do wish we knew that, because I think we're way too selfish as a people. And yeah.
But it's that insecurity, and I hope you don't mind me sharing this, but before we started recording, you were very nervous and rightfully anxious about the podcast, and I almost got the feeling, it's like, is Jordan up for it?
No,
but you spoke so confidently, eloquently, and I think, I hope that shows you as well the power of sharing our stories and having confidence in our journey, but you found it all right?
Yeah, I found it. I enjoyed it, and I'm very thankful for you for inviting me. I had my own, I was like, obviously scared of not doing a good enough job, or being not one of the good guests. But I think, I'm really glad I did it, and I really am grateful for you creating this space for me to be here and share my story.
Pleasure. I'm just so glad you came in our live cross on the basketball court. And,
Yes.
Yeah.
Indeed, and
you are that guy.
I am that guy. Do you hear that, Mom? No, cut that out. But no. I'm so grateful for that. I'm so grateful for you making this space for me. Thank you so much. Okay. Oh.
Almost
We're
midnight.
shaking hands.
Almost midnight as well.
Oh, is it almost midnight?
Yeah.
Jeez.
All right, see ya.
All right, I need to get going.